there's a lot like a trepidation in my mind when it comes to, like, because it's something you and I both do as a labor of love, and I feel guilty, letting you finish my work, even though you keep telling me how much you love doing it, I still feel guilty, like
No. I'm hoping eventually when I'm too, I mean, this is me planning ahead. When I'm too old, my ears don't work anymore, and I'm in an old folks' home. You're not able to do it anymore. That you will have learned from the master, and you'll go. I know exactly what to do here.
Yeah.
But I don't think you will ever like that process. If you don't like it now, if that's not your thing, then I don't think that's the kind of person you are. But the only reason I ever really made music was I wanted to muck about with it. I wanted to muck about with the minute I got multi-tracking. My head exploded, and it was like, wow, you can do this and you can do that. And I understand, how Frankzappa did what he did. I obviously can't do what he did because I'm not as skilled as him. But I understand that. I understand Holger Shukai, all these kind of producers, Bill Laswell, that I kind of sort of tried to absorb what they did. I understand all that, and that's me. That's what I do. And I would be happy just to play bass on something or nothing at all, and just take it and mould it and shape it and get it all working. And the modern software is so good. It's so good.
Yeah, I know.
It doesn't clip. It doesn't clip the way the old analog stuff used to. If you drove it by accident, you'd suddenly hear this horrible clipping, and you go, oh shit! Now I've got to redo the whole fucking mix because everything's 6 dB too loud and it's clipping. So you had to go all over the desk and take everything down, kind of try and work it again. This doesn't do that. You've got a lot of leeway, especially if you start low. If you start at minus 6 dB, which Cubase labels as minus 12 for some reason. I guess because it's got further headroom because of the 64-bit. But you can push things a little bit, and it stays pristine and clean, which is great. It is important at gain stage though. I came across that a couple of times in your stuff where it was my fault. I'd driven stuff too hard. I was driving the EQs too hard, and I was thinking, where's that? It kind of, you get a kind of saturated kind of sound that everything should be clear, but it's not. It's got this muddy harmonic in it, and it was isotope ozone was saturated, and it wasn't clipping, but it was clearly suffering from being driven too much, which is weird because it's not physical wires. So why is it behaving as if it is? That's when I still can't get my head around. You're modelling the wires, so you're modelling the limitations of the wires as well. Why would you ever do that? I don't know, but it seems to be what they do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the time. It's coming, I'm sure, soon enough, I'm sure, that they stop trying to emulate analog and they try and make digital something that's beyond analog. They're getting there, and it's working that way. But I think it's something. I remember listening to someone who dealt very closely with designing cars in North America, and you're not a car guy, so you might not be aware of this, but like North America, well, you're aware of this, but North America is where the car was invented, but because of that, we're always way behind on the rest of the world because Americans or North Americans really like what they have. And then when someone from Japan or someone from Europe, whatever, comes in with a better version of what they already have, it doesn't matter because it doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. So they have to slowly change things for the better to, risk offending people that like the sound of an old rumbling V8 engine, or they like the sound of, they like the way it feels when it's hard to steer your car as opposed to being easy to steer your car.
Yes.
So I think I've always been kind of offended, when they, like when you see new digital VSTs, like 90% of them are emulating analog hardware. It's all about like, this is a console emulation of this, so this is a synthesizer emulation of that. And I'm like, give me something, that is only possible digitally. Why limit it? And that's the stuff I gravitate towards in a lot of the cases, like Pigments being my favorite soft synth. I think is a great example of like what you can only do with a DAW. You could do that with a piece of hardware, I guess, but it would have to be so goddamn big and have so much, it'd be so clunky, and Pigment streamlines it. Like that's where it shines, I think, right? That's the fact that's where I'm and Atmosphere is another example of that too. Those are my two favorite soft synths that they leave behind the analog realm, and they make it so you can still go analog. You can put samples into it, right? Like that's how I made Voices in the Wires almost all the sampling was done through Pigments, right? But, which I still find mind-blowing. And it's funny because for me, sampling, until recently, sampling had to be done one way, or it didn't work for me. And I've had to wrap my head around this thing, because I used to use a sampler called, which you can't use on Cubase, which really upsets me. It took me a while to get my head around it. I probably wouldn't have upgraded my system if I knew how much I was going to have to leave behind, because there's all these VSTs that won't run on the new Cubase. Even using JBridger or whatever it's called, I can't get them to work. They're dead to me now. And one of them was this free synth plugin called Short Circuit.
All right.
And on Short Circuit, you could sample every key on the keyboard, right? So when I would if I made a sample, like I had one called Ebotron, I had one called Guitarpsichord, where I recorded every single note on my acoustic guitar and then loaded them onto the keyboard. So every single note was a unique recording, right? Modern samplers, you're lucky if you can load in 5 samples or 6 samples before it's limited, and it does like a round robin or something. It'll pitch them for you. But I don't like the sound of the note being pitched down or up. I want the original sound, And it took me a while to just let that go and be like, you don't do that anymore. And then thankfully, Surge Team, or whatever the heck it's called, Surge XL, the company that has emulated Short Circuit into and ported it to a VST3, it is available. And I did rebuild my Ebotron, and I think I might use it on a song or two. I think, or maybe if I didn't, it's on a song or two coming up.
Yeah, there was nothing labeled Ebotron or anything like that.
Okay.
No, so
there you go. So yeah, there wasn't. So you might see something like that coming up, but that was Ebotron was, if you listen to like Forever, or the album Broken Songs for a Broken Man, or From a Broken Man, whatever it was called. Ebotron's all over those albums. Like every song's got Ebotron, because what I struggle with Ebo is you can't play chords with an Ebo. And on my Robot album, there's a few songs where I would have like 6 or 8 or 10 tracks where I'd be intentionally orchestrating a whole chord progressions with my guitar. And I found that so tiring and annoying that I remember thinking to myself, what if I could just load the notes onto a keyboard and play with my hands on a keyboard instead of doing this? And then I found Short Circuit. That's how I discovered that. That's how I began my sampling journey. But anyway, I didn't mean to digress, but
no, that's a good digression, because it does raise memories for me. I started sampling on an Akai S1000 with 6 megabytes of memory, which when I think about it, in some of the old Transport songs or some of my own stuff, I would have a stack of floppy disks, and the first samples would all be loaded up, and then there would be a part of the song which had to be there, and it had to be long enough for me to reload all the samples by floppy disk by hand. So it had to be like at least 30 seconds, 40 seconds long, and I would be madly sort of bunging floppy disks into this slot and pressing the button, and gee whiz, when I think about it, 6 megabytes. So people used to ask, how did you get all those samples in 6 megabytes? And I would say, well, I had to, so you start with a piano which was sampled, and then you'd have all the drums, but you couldn't have the drums and the piano at the same time. So people would say, but you've got the piano and the drums. And I say, yeah, but I have to reload. What, you sitting reloading them? Yeah, it's all done live. The version you hear was, if I'd had a microphone, you'd have heard me cursing and fuffing in the background as a disc didn't go in. Yeah, so things have changed. Things have definitely changed with sampling, and I left sampling behind really when I no longer used the S1000. Just because there were so many good sounds, I felt as though I didn't need to use a sampler. I could get the piano sound anywhere. I could get the drums anywhere, and the sort of bespoke sampling that I did of my voice. And there was a brilliant instrument that I made, which I really do miss. It was it looked like a flute, but it had a reed on it. So technically, it was a clarinet, I suppose, sort of. But it was a little ethnic thing from India that a friend of mine brought back. And he said, I brought you that, and it's the most wonderful, gorgeous sound. The reed on it was glued on, it wasn't like one of these things you could remove. It was just as it came, and it had this wonderful wah 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 sound you could get out of it. And the fingering on the thing was easy because it was just like a penny whistle, so I could actually play it. But I sampled that, and that's on a few tracks, and that's the only place I've ever heard that sound or anything like it, because it was so unique. But I was sad to let that go, but like you say, you move on. You just have to. There's so many options. You'd never lack for options of things to do. Yeah.
And that's one thing it's changed the way I do things. And sometimes I find it holds me back, and sometimes it accelerates me. Is the the access to the software now, because before I met you and before I built the system here in Nova Scotia, I was using like an old cracked version of Cubase 5, and sometimes going back to Adobe Edition 3 or Cool Edit 2, Cool Edit 2 Pro, whatever it was, Cool Edit Pro 2. That's what I was using before.
Cool Edit Pro, yeah, that's going back a while.
Yeah, so I was still using that until like 6 months before I met you, and so like a lot of what I was doing, and I wasn't a big like forum guy. Like I wouldn't go online and search technology. I just got to the point where, because, unlike the opposite of you, I just wanted to make music. I didn't care about the process of it. I just wanted to, and as soon as I got multi-tracking on my computer, I was like, fuck the band. I don't need anybody anymore. Like, I'll just be the band, and TuneTrack was a big leap forward for me too when they came out with Easy Drummer. Like, because when Easy Drummer first came out, I pirated a copy immediately, and I used Easy Drummer 1 for years and years till I actually bought Easy Drummer 3 when it came out. That's when I started thinking like, wow, what do you pay for software? Things do get a little easier, but then I realized that's only for certain companies. I've come to learn that pirating software, again, is actually much easier than paying for software in most cases.
In some cases, yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely.
But I would just get like the small handful of things I really needed to work, and then anything that was in my head, I would dream up ways to do it, right? Like the Ebotron thing, right? That wasn't like, no one said like, hey, you can just do this with an Ebo and not worry about doing it. It was like I was struggling to do something in my head, and then I had found the way to do it. And so a lot of my earlier stuff, anything that sounds wild and fantastic, is just guitar work. Like, it's not a synthesizer. Like, I remember talking to my friends how much I've been loving synthesizers in the last handful of years, and they're like, haven't you always loved synthesizers? Like, your music's full of synths. I'm like, no, it wasn't. Almost everything you think is a synth is a guitar, and it's some manipulation of a guitar of some sort. And they're like, well, how do you play your guitar like that? And I'm like, well, I'm not playing it. It's I sampled it, and then I did this to it and that to it, and fed it through this. And the other software that I had that was legal, that was a big deal for me, was Podfarm and Gearbox by Line 6. And again, that came because I bought a piece of hardware, right? I was looking for a way to plug in a condenser mic into my computer. I used to use just the onboard sound card with a little 1/8 jack, and I'd buy a converter to go to a quarters jack, and I'd record directly through my guitar pedal. Like, I had like a little Zoom 505. Do you ever remember those guitar pedals?
Yeah.
Just like the two buttons on them. So that's how I recorded directly into my computer, making these terrible sounding songs. And then I remember, like, I heard somebody make some music one day. I'm like, how'd you make it sound like that? He's like, well, I mic'd my amp, and I mic'd this, and I mic'd that. So I went and bought myself a nice condenser mic. When I say nice, a $60 condenser mic from Musician's Friend in the US, and paid the duty to get it across to Canada. And I plugged it in, and it wouldn't work. And I'm like, oh, I need phantom power. What the hell is this? And then so I'm trying to buy a sound card. I found Line 6. I was already a fan of Line 6 because I had one of their amplifiers at the time. I found Line 6 had this thing called the UX2, the 2-channel preamp with phantom power. It had a headphone jack on it. It had little needles and stuff that showed you your amplitude, whatever you call it, a VU meter, which I thought was so cool. I'm like, I have a VU meter now, and it had like that yellow glow to it too, like it was from
yeah. There's something quite awesome about them.
I still have it too. It's on the shelf over there. It probably doesn't even work anymore, but I can't get rid of it. It's nostalgic. And so I remember I plugged that in, and then it prompted me to download all the software, and the software was Podfarm, or originally it was called Gearbox, and it became Podfarm, and it had it laid out like you had your effects pedals and your amplifiers, and I was blown away that I could like make my guitar sound like it's coming out of a Fender amp or a Vox amp or whatever, and that just exploded me. But anyway, when I got to that point, that's when I basically stopped. I was like, there's no need to go beyond this. I can do everything I want now. Everything that's in my head can come out of me. And I found that was a wonderful way to exist, because my uniqueness came from my lack of wanting to go beyond that, and just having to like craft things like out of ingenuity. I was constantly like inventing ways to make music. And then when I went and paid for the whole software bundle of, at the time, it was like, a year and a half ago or something, or 2 years ago, I bought the thing from Arturia called the Belladonna Sound Explorers, or something it was called. And it was like this hard drive with like 600 gigs of stuff. And it was all like, it came with pigments and a whole bunch of V instruments, like the piano I use and the Hammond B3 organ and all these, and most of the stuff I don't even touch. Like most of it's garbage, I think. But but the handful of things that came with it that I love, I still love. You know, like there's a bunch of effects and the instruments that I find completely indispensable. You know, and
so was that a physical thing then? When you say a hard drive, it wasn't a download?
I should have downloaded it, but I really wanted. I don't know why, but I ended up paying for the physical version. It's just this is the hard drive.
Oh right, I had no idea that was a thing, but that's a great thing. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and the hard drive it's a terabyte solid state hard drive, and I'm probably going to delete the information on it because I have it backed up in several places and just use it it's a really, really nice hard drive, you know, and it's USB-C. But I don't know why. And I actually, I think it went on sale at Sweetwater Music in the US. Like it was on sale for like $600 American. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was cheaper than me buying the software bundle from Arturia, buying the physical version. But by the time it got to me, I think I overspent because I had to pay duty on it and shipping and like the Canadian government added like $200 to the bill when it came across the border, you know? I do have a beautiful little silver hard drive that sits on my desk, you know? It's like when I bought Cubase Pro, like I paid for that too, Cubase 12 Pro. I lied and said I was a student, so I got half price, got the educational copy, which works the same way.
They didn't ask you for proof then?
Oh, I made a fake student ID, I did a whole bunch of stuff. And
you pirate, you.
Yeah, you know, and so then I called Sweetwater and I said, how do I prove I'm like I have all this stuff? Because Steinberg wanted all the proof, right? So I didn't want to go through the scrutiny of it. So I thought maybe Sweetwater would be a little more lax. And so I called them. I said, I want the educational copy of Cubase 12. And they're like, okay. And they just mailed it to me. And again, it came in the mail like in a little box about this big with a physical card in it with the serial number on it, like whatever the key to unlock it. Mm-hmm. And I installed it and it works great. You know, you would never know it's an educational version, except for when you first open it, it says like educational copy in the very bottom while it's loading. Yeah. And otherwise it's the full version, which pisses my buddy off because my buddy, he bought Cubase 12 at the same time I did, or like a month or two before I did. And he bought the Element version, like the stripped down version, mm-hmm. which cost the same as the full version if you buy the educational version. And he's sometimes he'll call me up and he's having issues. He's like, how do you do this on your song, or how'd you do that? And I'll say, I did this and I click that, and he'll go to do it and it'll be like pro version only, or it won't be in this thing.
That's horrendous. That hurts. That hurts. With that, I don't have any truck with anything that's a cut down version because I never want to experience that in my creative flow. No. I never want to go, you can do 64 tracks on this, and then find out that yours only does 16 because you haven't paid the extra, which was the kind of thing that used to happen in the old days. Yeah. It's no. And that's when I really turned to pirating stuff, because I can't have that in my workflow, and I can't afford to spend £1,000 on one bit of software. You know, it's not. I just don't have that capacity. So, and I make no apology. I'll defend that to the hilt. And I think companies should put out free versions that are just as good. Yeah. Maybe things like that people like us don't use, like syncing up with video or something like that. Something that a pro level would use. Yeah, have that in the pro version. But you gain so much, I think, as a vendor by bringing people into your environment, you know. And so, okay, you've not sold your £500 or £1,000 worth of software, but you might sell a plugin for 20 quid, or, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if these plugins were £20 each, who would pirate them? Especially if there's updates and things, and you would get that, that sort of thing, and they would sell very many more, like they do on the iPad. The iPad Cubase on the iPad is like £20 or £30, and it's not the same, but for an iPad it does. I recorded for 10 years with that.
There you go.
You know,